단단한 자의 사실상 집회에 용홍 제일 고단 은 되게 용 제가 그래서 다 가서 집회 용홍을 때는 사모자리 동 자신 제지라서 는 또 셀링바네 또 제파데 아주 살서서 소다 집회 성공 다 되는 제일 고단.
Yesterday we heard how this particular text or this particular teaching is being subdivided into first the actual origin of the transmission lineage, secondly the general points that have to be known, that should be general common knowledge, and then the actual text itself, the actual explanation text itself, which contains the explicit instructions. We have heard about the first part, about the origination of the lineage. Yesterday in particular we have heard in that respect how when it comes to the transmission of the Bodhicitta, the Bodhisattva commitments, there are two major lineages, the lineage of far-reaching conduct and the lineage of profound view. Of these we have heard yesterday. Today we will proceed with the second main topic, which is the points that generally need to be known.
송축의 샘 검발의 세바 되는 양난 나랑서 용의가 거는 성을 유반하고 다 된지게 갈라 있나 당부가 되는 조 셀링파가 조를 추도 조를 성도 다 되는 디바지 통소리.
Now, generally speaking, when we set out to either contemplate the enlightened attitude, which is known as bodhicitta, to implement bodhicitta in our activities, or whether we set out to go into seclusion, to practice intensively in retreat, very generally speaking, there are 6 topics or 6 points which have to be taken into account. And these have been summarized and explained concisely by Serlingpa as the 6 things, or the 6 points that have to be applied, or the 6 applications of these. Rinpoche will tell us a little now.
다텔라 되는 조비치 담보데 딱 말한 청난도 반다. 야나 송주 샘 검반 영리 세바도. 야나 나로 다단단다고 코스 주건 된지게 담보데라 되는 내공대 장마야 보고 탈라 당기 매바지 힌텔라 장마지 되는 잡발라서 칸발라 잡발라서 대야보 버저 다 된다와 제저 당 아니 대단한 고송 투팀 다지 나라라 담바 송지 정된지 고생 다 되라 세동 몰라서 되면은 도라서 줘봐 살아 제줘봐 되니 고파린 다 간지 요나 용기바리 된다와 조的담바 고생 제상 다 되게 이해한데 되는 아 송주 삼바 파관장바 용기니세 다 된지 제지 좀마 된지 고파도 고통 상 되니 대동양도 되니 송대라 송지게 송 다음에 그 보다라서 된지 야다 된지 그 성도 알아서 콩바사바라 괜찮은 콩바사바지 탑나 다된 콩바데 야보요나 용 띵康바데 양자지 저 장마지 되니 대라 추저 가도 나야고 제거도
So from among these 6 applications, these 6 points that need to be taken into account before we set out to contemplate and give rise to the enlightened attitude, or to practice in seclusion, to practice intensively in retreat, or for the purpose of coming together to receive Dharma teachings like we are doing presently now. The first of these applications is that at the very beginning, at the very outset of such activities, the place in which these activities take place has to be thoroughly cleaned. So whether we come together in such a place or whether we do a retreat in a small room or a small hut somewhere, we should make sure that to the best of our ability, both inside and out, we clean this place. We make it very pure, we make it very clean, free of any stains, free of any dust, any dirt whatsoever. And having provided that, we then proceed to enshrine or to put or to construct a little shrine upon which we arrange the representations of Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. To that end, for instance, we could take a Buddha statue, and it doesn't matter whether this is a gilded metal statue or a stone or a clay one or a tanka or a photo of a tanka for that matter. Any representation of the Buddha will do in that respect. Then we arrange representations of those who practice this teaching, the Sangha, in the form of pictures or statues, etc., either of Chenrezig or Manjushri or Tara. And we also should have representations of the teaching of the Buddha, of the Dharma itself, in the form of some kind of a Dharma book. All of this is to be arranged nicely and cleanly upon a shrine, and in these very clean surroundings, as has been described. And then Rinpoche added, it is as if we were to move into a new house that we have just constructed. Even though the house is new, of course, we would first set out by way of thoroughly cleaning it, giving it a good paint job, and only then would we move in. All of this is the first of these 6 activities or applications that have to be applied. On top of that, we would be well advised to also put a picture of our own root teacher, of our own root lama upon that shrine, together with these representations as have been enumerated already. Also, in particular, when it comes to the representation of the Dharma, the teaching of the Buddha, Rinpoche says it does not matter whether this Dharma text is written in English or in German or in Tibetan or whatever language. The language, the letters, the script does not matter at all. The content does. And having said that, it should also go without saying that whatever Dharma text, even being it just notes that we make of the teachings that we listen to, should be treated with great respect, should not be left lying around in low places, even on the floor, on the carpet, but we should always respect these Dharma teachings in such a way that we place them in slightly higher places. The second of these 6 points speaks about offerings that should be arranged. Having in the first step prepared our surrounding, prepared our shrine as has been described, we should then in the second step proceed to set out offerings. Again, whether it is at the place where we do our daily practice or where we come together, like here, for the purpose of listening to Dharma teachings, or whether we find ourselves in retreat or whatever, we should set out a certain amount of offerings in front of these objects that we venerate. Again, it also does not matter whether we are able to set out great, wonderful offerings in great number and great quantities, or whether we just have a little at our disposal. The fact that we actually do so is the important thing, and this then entails the second of these 6 points. Now, when it comes to these offerings themselves, everything like flowers, like incense, or for that matter also pure, clean water are proper offerings, are good offerings. However, in which way we offer, we should give this offering free of any feelings of avarice. We should not, for instance, if we offer a flower or if we offer incense, we should not offer the cheapest ones that we can find, but we should rather get the best materials which are at our disposal and offer them free of any feeling of wanting to keep something back for oneself or wanting to keep something back for later times, but offer it freely without any clinging to these things, without any avarice, and also without any particular feeling of pride and how great and wonderful we are to be able to make such offerings, etc. On top of that, when we arrange these offerings, for instance, in the form of offering bowls inside of which we present the offerings, we should do so in a very orderly, in a very clean and very orderly way. The row of offering bowls should not be arranged in a random way, the one standing here, the other standing there, the gaps between them being of a great difference, but they should be arranged in a very orderly, in a very nice way that is pleasing to look at.
sang lu changbo ji tian zhao jin dou tani yang de lo chenbo yin ba de min na yong lo chung chung yan na yong zu bo la na sa yo ba ji yan na yang ko zhao ge dan nan dong na de ge no na ko zhao ge dan nan dou ta nga ru de kan ji zu bo la kan ji de ge do tian zhao jin dou lu ge chan tani sam ge chan tani long pa dang zu ngo ba de la mi pe yor jin and long years in the Cella, and some good nepate, she drummed it somebody.
Now, having set the surroundings in step 1 and 2, as has been described according to Serlingpa's 6 points, then within these surroundings we now make our seat, the seat upon which we will sit to perform our practice. As we are young and vigorous, free of any sickness, free of any ailments, we could very well sit in the full Vajra position with erect back, hands and meditation posture, and proceed to practice in this way. Some of us are elderly, some of us are not in such good condition, may be sick in whichever way. In this case, it is also perfectly all right to sit upon a comfortable chair. The important thing is that we take up a comfortable position out of which we will then proceed the practice. Once we have taken up that comfortable physical posture, we should then proceed to first focus upon our breathing for a short while in order to bring about a peaceful frame of mind. To that end, for instance, we could concentrate upon 21 inhalations and exhalations, breathing as normally, as naturally as possible, and try to concentrate ourselves fully upon that in order to bring about a more peaceful, more settled state of mind. These two instructions, both of the physical posture as well as bringing mind to rest, make up the third of the 6 applications of Serlingpa. Now, having set the stage in this way with the outer surroundings as well as our physical posture, and having settled our minds through the concentration upon the breath, we then continue to imagine how all these sources of refuge, all those under whose protection we place ourselves, are truly present in front of us in space slightly above us. We could do so in a very elaborate way, by way of imagining much the same as we do during the preliminary practices, when we do imagine the tree of refuge objects, where there is the Buddha Vajradhara as the essence of all lineage lamas and the union of all root gurus above him, or the lamas of the transmission lineage. In front of him we would imagine all the Idam deities upon his right side, all the Buddhas behind him, all the Dharma teachings in the form of Dharma books on his left side, the Sangha in the form of the great Bodhisattvas, and below all of them all Dharma protectors and guardians. For some, this might be a somewhat too elaborate visualization. One could then, for instance, simply imagine Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha to be present, to be truly present in front of us in space. And even if that is too elaborate or too complicated, then we could simply concentrate upon our own root teacher to be truly present in front of us as the essence of all of these sources of refuge. All of these sources of refuge and protection are being embodied in the one and single body or shape of our own root teacher. And having imagined this in front of ourselves in whichever way we prefer, we would then proceed to first place ourselves under their protection by way of taking refuge to them, and then giving rise to the enlightened attitude, giving rise to the attitude of Bodhicitta, to the conduct of Bodhisattva. So these 2 points, the visualization of the sources of refuge and then the taking refuge and giving rise to the enlightened attitude, they make up the 4th point of the 6 points of Serlingpa. We then proceed to the 5th of the 6 points of Serlingpa, which is the performance of the so-called 7 steps or the 7 branches, also known as the 7-branch prayer. It is that particular practice which is designed in order to bring about the accumulation of the 2 stocks of merit, which start out with the performance of prostrations, with the confession of our misdeeds, etc. The first of these 7 branches or 7 steps is that of performing prostrations. For instance, if we were to find ourselves in a retreat situation, that means that occasionally, whenever it would be convenient for ourselves, that we would remind ourselves of this fact and then actually get up and perform some prostrations in front of all of these objects or sources of refuge. Now, when we set out to perform prostrations, we should do so in a very particular way. And this starts out by way of reminding ourselves of the symbolic meaning of the various acts that we perform during the prostrations. For instance, when we get up and when we fold our hands in front of our hearts, this folding our hands in front of ourselves in a respectful way before we proceed to prostrate itself symbolizes the bringing together or the coming together or the union of method and wisdom. Having folded our hands in this way, and having reminded ourselves of the symbolic meaning of doing so, we then proceed to first raise these folded hands to our foreheads, and then to our throats, and then to our heart levels. As we do so, then we think at the same time that while doing like this, all the obscurations and misdeeds of our bodies are being purified. While raising our hands to the level of our throats, all the misdeeds and obscurations, etc., of our speech are being purified and eradicated. And when we lower our folded hands then to the level of the heart, we imagine how through performing this gesture, all the misdeeds, obscurations, defilements of mental activity are being completely purified and eradicated.
다른 탐문이 소설체 용주 우주군이 쪽을 거동롱지 쪽을 거에 선진상지 단자 전문제도 단지게 다른 땀들이 성도.
Having performed these motions, then finally we separate our hands again, separating our hands in such a way that both of our palms are visible again. This symbolically signifies that in the future we will be able to emanate or to manifest, rather, the two form bodies, the Nirmanakaya and the Sambhogakaya of Buddhahood for the benefit of beings. When we then finally move down, touching the ground with hands and knees, this signifies or this symbolizes our conquering or our going beyond all lower rungs. When doing so, we then touch the ground with all of the 10 fingers, which signifies that eventually we will traverse the so-called 5 paths and 10 bhumis or stages. After having touched the ground with our 10 fingers, which symbolizes the achieving or traversing of the 10 bodhisattva stages, we then proceed to touch the ground with our foreheads. This signifies that in the future we will be able to achieve the 11th stage, which is that of complete full enlightenment of Buddhahood itself, the complete awakening in itself. As we then proceed to prostrate our 2 legs and our 2 hands, so our 4 limbs are constantly stretching and bending, etc. And this signifies that after having achieved the state of complete awakening of Buddhahood, we will then be able to perform spontaneously the 4 types of Buddha activity for the sake of beings. In the course of such prostration, our spine is constantly being bent and stretched again, and this signifies that all our subtle energies or winds will eventually be brought into the central channel. Now, in the course of such prostrations, we first bow down, we prostrate, then we rise up again. This signifies that in the future we will be able to establish all beings in the state of Buddha. Even if we were able to perform only a single prostration, we should consider it to be endowed with all of these qualities and characteristics. Now, so much for prostrations. When it comes to offerings, then of course there will be the material offerings that we have managed to bring together and that we have in some way arranged upon our shrine. But on top of that, we should not just leave it at that. On top of that, we should imagine a great deal of more offerings to be appearing. Whatever could be an object brings about pleasure in whichever conceivable way. All of this, together with the actual material offerings that we have arranged, we imagine to present as an offering. After this, we then proceed to the next step, which is the confession of misdeeds. Confession of misdeeds means that for the first part, or the first step, we first remind ourselves of all the negative deeds that we have done in our previous lifetimes and this lifetime, that we then give rise to regret or remorse about them, and after having done so, then in front of all the sources of refuge, etc., we then proceed to confess them.
And Jesus Yaroma, Yinji Gavadrobala, Aram Magawa, Tadula Sopa, Meba, Della Sangavi, Jesus Yaromante, and Jesus Yarama.
Then follows rejoicing. Rejoicing in the merits the merits and the virtues of others. This means a particular attitude or mindset which allows us to truly feel joy about the good, about the virtue that others have performed, about the merits that others have accumulated, free of any avarice, free of any envy on our own part, envying the virtue of others, but rather rejoicing happily in them.
Sanjido Songju Samba Tangila, and Chujin Holokola, so and Debate, Chujin Holokola Tang, and then Songju Sambanga Hit, Yamilan, David Sur, Tambarzina, Yang, Yamilan Mandawa, Yang, to Jupar so and Deba, Tati Nita, and he gives a more man or 17 and not the body.
Now the final 3 steps wrapped up in one. First, there is the request from our side whenever we come into the presence of teachers, when we think of the Buddhas that have been teaching, that are teaching in this world, that we request them to continue to turn the wheel of the Dharma, as it is called, which means that they continue to teach the Dharma to beings like us who are so needy of it. Together with this, wherever we meet such great teachers, Buddhas, Bodhisattvas, great masters, we request them not to proceed into the state of nirvana, but to remain with us in this world in order to keep guiding us upon the path. And then finally, in the last step, in the 7th step or branch, we then recognize that through all of these virtues doing in the first 6 steps, we have accumulated a great deal of merit, and this merit we then freely and without any attachment dedicate for the sake and welfare of all beings. That makes up the 7 steps of the 7th branch.
Serlingpa go to Trupati, then Maranta Gavaka, Drona Yang, Gavaki, Jesus, then he gave it our Senjin, Movata, then Senjin Tanki, Devaton, Demba Lasso, Melom Debatilindo.
Then accordingly, the final of the 6 applications of Serlingpa's describes how we should continuously dedicate all the positive, all the virtue, all the good that has ever been practiced by ourselves and others for the sake of others, and to combine this with wishes, prayers and aspirations for the sake of these beings.
Nyungdi tarar toba mayin song. Ngaranzon ta tori lada may. Pena ngaranzon laye tata senan sape toge. Laye luchi lang na yang. Nekabza deji pasung sopa yore de. Tena yung tela. Tena ngaru senan de zo charne. Tena chimkho wala maa chomdo song. Pena kullu juru jagbo luke. Kiawake Lonayo, Marusano, the Zotane, Ayuma Saetan, Sadan Tatangaron, Jitin on Kiba, in a Martin, and Koala Man Chamungri, Telaten, Lado, May, Deji Pasun Sopa, Nimbo Kano Yomare.
Concerning these points, Kongtrul Thaye included a quote of the great Indian master Nagarjuna in his text. And it says here, Nagarjuna rather said, that if either myself or anyone else within this world would decide to bring about such awakening, to bring about such unsurpassable highest awakening, then the root thereof would be this enlightened attitude, would be this awakened heart known as Bodhicitta, which is like the king among all mountains. That is to say that in order to proceed along these lines, in order to bring about such awakening of Buddhahood, our resolve has to be like that. It has to be as stable, as firm as the king of all mountains, or the king of all mountain ranges, stable and firm like such a rocky mountain.
Rong Jabo Tao, Tembo, Yonayon, the Gahi Jella, Senking Gahi Jella, Songchuk Samuel, Senking Gahi Jella, Somebody in Matapna, that the young Tap, Songchuk San Mare, Theatre Mine, and Senking Tongi, let any Ninji Chambuga, and in Tanzito, then you get Ninji to Google.
The quote of Nagarjuna then continues, saying that on top of that which he has mentioned before, we also need to be endowed on the one hand with compassion that is free of any that extends into all directions, as well as the awareness that is free of being fixated in any dualistic way. That means to say that we need to bring about these two in such a way so as not to only take into account ourselves and a few of our loved ones, but to extend our activity, our loving kindness, our compassion, etc., towards all beings.
That is on to the same Tedong Yamdo, Nila Medin Yishila, and Phuntsok, Dog, Huge, Nila Martin Park, and our Sanky Nilu Sajam, that they Google, they need them, Zona, and Songi Compong of the Manor. Yes.
So in this way, Nagarjuna basically describes two preconditions or two routes. On the one hand, there has to be this Bodhicitta, which is like a rocky mountain, which expresses itself in the shape of loving kindness and compassion towards being. And secondly, there is the knowledge or awareness or wisdom, which is not based upon two, as it literally says here in the text, which is not based upon this dualistic, erroneous dualistic idea that on the one hand there truly is a self, and that on the other hand all the appearances and phenomena of this world have any self-nature whatsoever.
Sorong Songata, Zepa Gambata, Tetangi, Miki Sanang, Soda, Tenin, Sante, Sherab, Heneda, Radon Rasoba, Mini Higetori. They took Sana Yang, that they don't yonder, Tenin, Songi Compo, Menepe, Yundi, Parado Samba, Songi Compo top, Joron, majority, they take by Chamber, Jonso Chipe. Zawan Senji la Tuba Yin, that Miki Sanang Choto, Mimi Hideto, Sanang Cho, Geva Kanri, Drumna Yang, and then Ganon Song Chu Sang Zisamba. And then Tendiki Yina, then it Songi Componto, Jumanova, Drogore. Then it Miki Sanang Choto, Mimi Cho Kanri Sona, Ganon Song Chu Sang, Mandra, Song Chu Sang, Zimazina. They up Saki, Sananga Sosawa, the Songi, Componto of the Joroma, Thaye Sana, and Semki, Shannon, yes.
The author of our commentary, Kongtrul then continues to say, whatever merits we might accumulate through the practices of virtue, such as generosity, as patience, as concerted effort, etc., which all have a certain point of focus, or whatever objectless wisdom we give rise to predominantly through the practice of meditative concentration, as well as bringing to bear knowledge and intelligence. In short, to say, whatever we bring about through the practice of these six transcendent virtues or parameters will indeed bring about the two stocks of merit, will accumulate the two stocks of merit which are necessary for us in order to proceed along the path that leads to enlightenment. However, if we are not from the very start endowed with the motivation to bring about this awakening of Buddhahood for the sake of all beings, if that is not our basic motivation from the very first point, then no such great progress, no such great merit or virtue will be accumulated. Therefore, he stresses it very clearly that the basic motivation, which must be at the start of everything, the motivation to bring about the achievement of the awakening of Buddhahood for the sake of all beings, is utterly indispensable. Now, having heard about these points being indispensable, being the important thing, we might then think, how do we start out? What is the starting point? How do we initially set out upon this path that eventually will lead to the awakening of Buddhahood? Now, one of the main characteristics, if not the main characteristic of Bodhisattvahood itself, is the giving rise to loving kindness and compassion towards beings in a limitless way. So this must be our starting point. We start out upon the Bodhisattvapath, we start out with our Bodhisattva conduct and practice by way of giving rise to limitless compassion for all beings. So if from now on we proceed to give rise to such compassion, loving kindness and compassion towards being from the bottom of our hearts, if in this way we proceed along the Bodhisattva path, acting and practicing accordingly in this way, strengthening and deepening our compassion and our compassionate activity for the sake of beings continuously, and if in this way we then proceed to practice, to put into practice, to train ourselves in these 7 points of mind training, then eventually we will truly achieve the state of the awakening of complete Buddhahood, of complete enlightenment. And once we have achieved that state, then the compassion that we practice will develop into the ultimate, the highest type of loving kindness and compassion, which is utterly objectless, which is unguided, which pervades everywhere, free of being focused or directed in any which particular way.
Yang tapahi tatangaron ki toga mares e kiavarisa par yin rimbu ga par tani kene to rang la so par gong tani sina ma to tani tunga ne to lang song sang ni lu tani dan dang song ju san ki toga mare tani gen zo song ju ge san la gong na ten ni par da ma rong song ju san ki ge de san jin tang ji chen jin yin ba san jin tang ji dong han tang ji da zha rui ge tap si gu ba la so ba ten di tani song ju san ge zang la song long dang na gen zo song ju san de ma rong san ji de ji ge.
Now it goes without saying that presently all of us being beginners upon this path, we're not able as yet to give rise to such ultimate, highest compassion, to give rise to this highest of enlightened attitudes of Bodhicitta, to the ultimate Bodhicitta, but that we are rather more limited at present in our capacities. Therefore, we would be well advised to resort to that which is within the realm of our ability, and that is indeed the giving rise to loving kindness and compassion. If we train ourselves in such practices, in such activities for a long time, in accord with the world of appearances and phenomena, This also strengthens our mental calm, our development of a peaceful mental state, also known as shine or shamatha, and also our insight into the true nature, the true reality of appearances and phenomena, also known as laktong or vipassana. Then eventually, as we then proceed along these lines and practice, then truly we will be able to give rise to the highest realization, which will come about with the actual achievement of such a
Songji Tangji get then, Garba Mongu about the Taki Tangni, then he chew Tangji get no, then a Songju something children to Ryan, but and the Songji Gongre. There are then Aruga Sana, Songju Samgina, Dipadrova Tangji, Dog. Any Rambajana, then dead on your Danda Songju and Sugar Dong over there.
Proceeding in this way, practicing to the best of our ability, this bodhicitta or enlightened attitude in accord with the world of appearances and phenomena will indeed propel us along the path in such a way that eventually we will be able to give rise to the highest or ultimate bodhicitta, which is in accord with the true nature of appearances and phenomena as they really, truly are. And accordingly, the great Indian master Shantideva has said, through long thinking and deliberating, the sages of the past have concluded that there is no other way to proceed along these lines in order to achieve that goal. So whatever it is that we might do to give rise to bodhicitta in such a way, first to practice the conventional bodhicitta in accord with the world of appearances and phenomena to the best of our ability, will propel us along that path that will truly lead us to the achievement of enlightenment. And as we proceed along that path, the ultimate or highest bodhicitta will then eventually come to pass all by itself. And all of this should make it clear to us, should strengthen our resolve that indeed we ourselves, all of us as we're here now, give rise to this decision, to this resolve, to bring about this bodhisattva attitude within ourselves. So she wants to call the morning session to a close and says we have a very little bit of time should there be any questions.